in 20 states, and he shook up the Democratic Party. There is no question about that. He made his announcement on Vermont Public Radio and now has a campaign video for his 2020 bid. CNN's Ryan Nobles is live in Washington. He's been covering the Sanders campaign. That's been all of 17 minutes long at this point and has the latest details. Ryan.
John and Allison, good morning. And of course, it probably doesn't come as that big of a surprise to many Americans that Bernie Sanders has decided to run for president again. But there was a pretty intense deliberation among Sanders and his closest aides over the last several weeks as to when he should get in and the way he would get in. And he's doing it this morning with that interview on Vermont Public Radio and an email blast to his vast network of supporters that includes a video which outlines his rationale for running again after running in 2016. Take a listen to a part of that video.
Hi, I'm Bernie Sanders. I'm running for president, and I'm asking you today to be part of an unprecedented grassroots campaign of 1 million active volunteers in every state in our country. Our campaign is not only about defeating Donald Trump, the most dangerous president in modern American history. It is not only about winning the Democratic nomination and the general election. Our campaign is about transforming our country and creating a government based on the principles of economic, social, racial, and environmental justice.
And of course, the situation for Sanders in 2020 is going to be much different than it was in 2016. He surprised many people by waking up a progressive wing of the party that had not been as engaged as it had been in past presidential cycles. And many of the issues that Sanders ran on 4 years ago were deemed radical. Things like Medicare for all, a $15 minimum wage, and free college tuition. They've now become part of the mainstream conversation and almost the price of entry for many of these Democratic candidates that have already entered the field. And of course, Sanders is also going to have a much better focus on certain aspects of the Democratic base that he did not do that well with in 2016, including female voters and African-American voters. He's already made entries into those communities, specifically the African-American community, by visiting South Carolina around Martin Luther King Day and meeting with black leaders in that key early state. And of course, one of the big issues the Sanders campaign is going to have to contend with are accusations of rampant sexual harassment in that 2016 campaign. Sanders has addressed that already. He's apologized and he's met with some of those accusers. But John and Allison, no doubt Bernie Sanders is a political force. He's one of the most recognizable politicians in America. He comes in now with no one surprised by his entry. It's going to be much different than it was 4 years ago.
It sure is, Ryan. Thank you. Stay with us if you would, because we have some questions for you. We also want to bring in MJ Lee, CNN national politics reporter, Harry Enton, CNN politics senior writer and analyst, and Nia Malika Henderson, CNN senior political reporter. Okay, Harry, let me start with you because it's a crowded field already. We'll pull up the graphics. So there are already at least 10 Democrats running. It's much different than just the short time ago that was 2016. You know, he occupied his own lane, it seemed, back then. Now it's an HOV lane. So how does that change?
I mean, look, last time, part of the reason he did so well was because he was the only real opponent to Hillary Clinton. And you see that in the polling right now. He starts off at 16% versus getting 42, 43% of the national primary vote. More than that, if you look at the left side of the party, last time around, he was the main liberal challenger to Hillary Clinton. This time around, you know, last week I did these slides, you know, how far left is the Democratic field? He's still the furthest left, but there are people joining him, Elizabeth Warren, Kamala Harris, even Kirsten Gillibrand, whose record has obviously shifted towards the left in the last few years. And so I think it will be more difficult for him to distinguish himself, but he starts off with the base and a lot of passionate supporters, so we'll see what happens.
And yeah, he was runner-up last time, and that generally means something in both parties. People know him. There are a lot of very passionate supporters. So tell me where you think, what space does he occupy in this Democratic field?
You know, I think he's mainly going to be just a voice for the left. It's really hard to imagine who the Bernie Sanders voter is at this point beyond what we know the Bernie Sanders voter has been. And it's sort of the Bernie bro, right? Somebody who's a bit younger, whiter, I think, than the overall Democratic primary process usually is in those voter groups. So it's hard to see what sort of lane in terms of building some sort of multiracial coalition. It is interesting, though. He clearly clearly is mindful of that.
Oh, yeah.
While he has moved, I think, the party left on any number of issues, Medicare for all and college tuition, he himself has been moved left on issues around race by the party itself, right? He was very uncomfortable in many ways talking about race. In 2016, there were some sort of uncomfortable interactions he had with Black Lives Matter protesters. You see in that announcement video, he mentions racial equality, right? And that's something I think we're going to hear quite a bit from him. He calls the president a racist. Not every candidate has done that so far. And so we'll see how that plays. But I think it's still going to be difficult, I think, for him to expand what we know are that core group of supporters, which are primarily younger voters, as well as white voters as well, and primarily male voters. But we'll see. He's going to be an interesting voice out there in this very, very crowded field.
MJ, he talked about the political revolution in his announcement, the political revolution that he started, he said a few years ago, and now it's time to finish it. But you've been out on the trail with people who have filled that void in the time that he hasn't been in the race. There are people who think that they're carrying the mantle of that political revolution.
Absolutely. And it was fascinating, in that video, Bernie Sanders referred to people joining this unprecedented grassroots movement. The reality is this movement is no longer unprecedented because he did it back in 2016. He's now running for a second time in 2020. And I think there is something important to be said about a difference in a candidate being a first-time runner and trying again for a second time. And purely anecdotally, when you're out in Iowa, New Hampshire, the early states, talking to voters who are undecided right now, but coming out to see what the Democratic candidates have to say, you definitely see that there are former Bernie supporters out there who want to know now this time around, among the buffet of options that I have this time around, who is going to speak to me the most. Not everyone is going to be loyally supportive of Bernie Sanders just because they voted for him last time, because as everyone else has mentioned on this panel, he is not alone this time in challenging sort of the establishment-backed, more moderate and centrist candidate. He is going to be joined by so many others who, in large part, were inspired by the message that he had in 2016, and every sort of platform and idea and policy idea that he brought into the mainstream for the Democratic Party. So he is not alone this time, and he is not a new face this time, and that is so important.
I thought when I saw Elizabeth Warren announcing last night and today universal child care through kindergarten, I thought maybe she was preemptively trying to get this policy out there to take some of the air out of the Bernie balloon that's rising today. But you tell me that she was going to do it no matter what today anyway.
Well, and I think when she's releasing these policy positions, I don't know if they're necessarily pegged to other candidates getting in, but she is making sure that her policy positions are very clear very early on. And we're not seeing all of the other candidates necessarily doing this, but the fact that even in just this year, and we're only in the month of February, that she has this wealth tax plan that's already out. She has this universal child care plan that's already out. That means that Bernie Sanders is going to have some catch up to do in terms of making sure that he lays out fresh proposals that are clear to the people so that they know what they're voting for this time around.
Ryan, what about the scandal that cropped up on the Bernie Sanders campaign, or the accusations that women who worked on that campaign did not feel that they always got a fair shake and felt somewhat mistreated? Where is that now?
Well, listen, Allison, there's no doubt that this is going to be a problem for Bernie Sanders. This is a cloud that hangs over his campaign for the way it was conducted back in 2016. But I talked to a lot of people that were big supporters of Bernie Sanders 4 years ago, people within the campaign who did acknowledge and perhaps were even victims of sexual harassment during that campaign. And very few of them actually blame Bernie Sanders himself. They believe that he just did not have a full grasp as to what was happening at every level of his campaign. And they really want to give him the opportunity to make things better this time around. And Sanders has already made steps in that direction. He met with some of those accusers. He apologized for the way that they were treated during his campaign. And they've already implemented changes in terms of the human resources infrastructure that existed in 2016 versus how it's going to be run this time around. I think the big issue here for Sanders, though, is that you're not seeing a ton of criticism from his fellow competitors in this race. And that's because within the confines of these massive campaign infrastructures, there's concern that he's not the only person that perhaps had these problems within the campaign. I think the big issue for him is how he deals with it and how it's handled going forward. But, guys, in a field with so many candidates and so many of them essentially espousing the same political beliefs, one little miscue like this could be something that could make a voter go in a different direction. And there's no doubt that that's something Bernie Sanders is going to have to deal with.
And they may be careful about going after Bernie Sanders because many of them have adopted so many of his ideas over the last few years and they have become Democratic mainstream to a certain extent. However, Harry, I think it was notable that we heard Senator Kamala Harris of California in New Hampshire yesterday. Perhaps she knew that Bernie Sanders was about to get in the race, trying to create some space between herself and Bernie Sanders, who calls himself a Democratic socialist. Listen to Senator Harris yesterday.
Well, the people of New Hampshire will tell me what's required to compete in New Hampshire, but I will tell you I am not a Democratic socialist.
It's very interesting when candidates start to tell you what they are not.
Yeah, I think that this is an example of one, that even if the field is further left than it was last time, Bernie Sanders is still the furthest left in this particular field. Two, it's an example that Kamala Harris is definitely thinking about the general election. Socialism as a tag plays better in a Democratic primary, especially in Iowa and New Hampshire, perhaps less so down south, where Democrats are more moderate conservative. But it also is an example, in my mind, that she recognizes, hey, there's still a center of the Democratic electorate that's out there. I need to go after them as well and not just tie myself down to the left, because if you do that, still 50% of primary voters this time around are going to call themselves moderate conservative, and a label like Democratic socialist may not play so well with them.
Neil, let's talk about the other news that happened last night if people are just waking up, and that is that 16 attorneys general in the states are suing President Trump for his emergency declaration. They say that he is basically pilfering their funds that their voters counted on all sorts of different state projects to fund his border wall. They are doing it, they say, in an expedited fashion. They say that they want to do this quickly. But, of course, this will play into the 2020 race also.
It certainly will. And Donald Trump certainly anticipating this, and his team anticipating this. Of course, these are Democratic AGs all across the country. And we've seen this before, right? If you think about his Muslim ban, there were a lot of Democratic AGs that banded to get together to fight that. Of course, the Supreme Court essentially ruled with Donald Trump on this. Donald Trump predicting in his press conference in that sing-songy voice that ultimately things would go his way in terms of the courts. We'll see. This is certainly a fight that Donald Trump wants. He is somebody who wants to keep this issue about the wall front and center, even though it's a fight that he essentially has lost in the sense that he did guarantee that this would be a wall that would be free and paid for by Mexico. That doesn't look like it's going to happen. But yeah, this is a fight I think that you're going to hear about from Donald Trump a lot. This idea that he wants to protect Americans, and it's Democrats who really want to stand in his way. We'll see what happens in the courts. Probably a bit of a ways to go in terms of what actually happens with this.
We have the president singing his song in the Rose Garden on Friday. Let's play that.
They will sue us in the Ninth Circuit, even though it shouldn't be there. And we will possibly get a bad ruling, and then we'll get another bad ruling, and then we'll end up in the Supreme Court, and hopefully we'll get a fair shake.
It's more of a patter song, sort of a Music Man type thing than really a melodic thing, MJ. But what you do hear there is the president acknowledging he knew he was going to have a legal fight here. And politically speaking, it seems to me he was okay with that he was setting up this legal fight for political purposes.
Right. And just keep in mind that in the big picture, this announcement in the Rose Garden represented a big defeat for him, but he wanted to do everything possible to sort of showcase and show to the people that are tuning in, this isn't a loss for me. I'm moving forward, and this is all going according to plan. And by the way, a part of that plan is that I know there are going to be legal challenges. I always knew that this was going to come. No big deal.
I mean, in fact, that the reporting, at least of the Washington Post, was that Mitch McConnell knew how to spin it for the president that you didn't lose Democrats lost. And so this was by design so that he could feel as though this was a win.
That's right. And for Republicans on Capitol Hill, they really didn't have a lot of options. They were stuck for a long time with the president who was not going to move on this issue, no matter how they sort of presented this issue to him, no matter how they explained sort of the mechanics of how things work on Capitol Hill. They knew they were working with a president who was not going to give this up.
He may have rehearsed that song, but he also said something in that news conference which creates a real legal issue and was brought up by the attorneys general, even in their legal briefing, where the president basically said, I don't have to do this. Let's play that.
I could do the wall over a longer period of time. I didn't need to do this, but I'd rather do it much faster.
And you know, those attorneys general, Harry, they picked right up on that because they say it just goes to show there is no need for an emergency. Politically speaking, the emergency doesn't poll particularly well.
No, it doesn't. In fact, it polls significantly worse than the wall. I think the best poll that's been on the emergency still has it trailing by an 18-point margin of those who oppose it versus those who support it. And most polls on average say by a 20-point margin or plus or more that more Americans oppose this national emergency than support it. So to me, this is a political play for the here and now just to get the government rolling. But in terms of the American government and people liking this, no. And I think that this does play well with his base for sure. But at the end of the day, you still have to win a general election, and Donald Trump continues to play to a base that already loves him. He has to recognize that 2020 is about the general election. If he continues stuff like this, it'll make himself more difficult for him.
All right, friends, thank you very much again. The breaking news, Senator Bernie Sanders from Vermont, he is in the Democratic race for president. In the meantime, a North Carolina woman has testified that she illegally collected and falsified absentee ballots in a 2018 congressional election. The 9th District race is the last undecided contest from the midterms, with the seat still open. Diane Gallagher is live in Raleigh with the latest on this. Diane.
Yeah, John, the executive director of the State Board of Elections opened up testimony yesterday saying that they had found evidence of a coordinated, unlawful, and substantially resourced absentee ballot scheme. And the first witness was a worker who basically laid all of that out. Lisa Britt worked for a political operative named McCrae Dallas. Now, I kind of want to break this down here because she's also his former stepdaughter. But Dallas was hired by a consulting firm that worked for the Republican candidate Mark Harris. Lisa Britt testified that she was paid by Dallas at least $150 per 50 absentee ballots that she collected. That in itself is illegal in North Carolina. But she continued on talking about filling in races that were left blank on unsealed ballots, signing as a witness on ballots that she didn't actually witness somebody voting in, and even forging her own mother's signature on some of those ballots there. Now, she said all of this came at the direction of Dallas. She said that Dallas went so far as to help them avoid red flags that he told them to sign in the same ink as the voter, how many ballots to mail from what post office and when, and how do you arrange the stamps on the envelopes. Now, again, she said that this came at the direction of Dallas and that Dallas told them not to tell anybody. He sent them a message right before, she said, saying not to testify. Dallas chose not to testify yesterday. And John, she said the thing she wanted to point out more than anything, though, was that she believes that the candidate Mark Harris had no knowledge of this whatsoever. John, we're hoping that sometime this week we will find out what is going to happen in this 9th district, whether or not they're going to certify Harris as the winner or declare a new election.
It is still undecided. You know, these accusations and evidence of malfeasance there. What will happen? Diane Gallagher for us in Raleigh. Thanks so much.
All right. Meanwhile, Stacey Abrams is one of the rising stars in the Democratic Party. So what does she think about Bernie Sanders' big announcement this morning that he is jumping into the race? We're going to ask Stacey Abrams about that, as well as her own political future. Next.
It's absolute confidence in 30,000 precision parts. Or it isn't. It's inspected by Mercedes-Benz factory-trained technicians. Or it isn't. It's backed by an unlimited mileage warranty. Or it isn't. For those who never settle, it's either Mercedes-Benz certified pre-owned or it isn't. The Mercedes-Benz certified pre-owned sales event now through February 28th, only at your authorized Mercedes-Benz dealer.
You know, I used to be good at this. You turn 40 and everything goes.
Tell me about it.
You know, it's made me think I'm closer to my retirement days than I am my college days. I'm thinking, will I have enough? Should I change something?
Well, you're asking the right questions.
Well, I just want to know, am I going to be okay?
Liberty Mutual won't raise their rates because of their first accident. Switch and you could save $782 on home and auto insurance. Call 1-844-567-9460 for a free quote today. Liberty Mutual Insurance.
Liberty, 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 liberty.
New Theraflu Power Pods, the cold and flu fighting machine you put in your machine. Press the button to brew up powerful relief to defeat your toughest cold and flu symptoms fast. New Theraflu Power Pods. Press, sip, relief.
Freezing cold. Blazing heat. Rain-X Silicone Advantage wiper blades are engineered to withstand the most extreme conditions. They last 2 times longer than traditional wipers. If Rain-X Silicone Advantage wipers survive these conditions, clearly they'll last in yours. Rain-X, outsmart the elements. Find Rain-X Silicone Advantage wipers at these retailers.
Smart news.
I was only watching news I agreed with.
I was only getting news from social media.
Now, I use Smart News.
It has news that matters.
I trust Smart News.
Download Smart News for free today.
People refer to the Bush family as a dynasty. That's what it is, and that's what it was.
The Bush Years on CNN.
Furnace breakdown, that could be $3,300. Fridge on a Fritz, that could cost you $2,500. Get the First American Home Warranty Plan. And when a covered item breaks, call or click. That's it. And we'll repair or replace it for you. Why let a major system or appliance breakdown bust your budget? Or go through the hassle of trying to find trustworthy service people?
If you don't have First American Warranty, get it.
Call 1-800-860-4881 for a free no-obligation quote.
You. All of you. How you live, what you love. That's what inspired us to create America's most advanced internet. Internet that puts you in charge. That protects what's important. That handles everything and reaches everywhere. This is beyond Wi-Fi. This is XFi. Simple, easy, awesome. Xfinity, the future of awesome.
Anderson Cooper 360. Tonight at 8 Eastern on CNN.
Breaking news, Senator Bernie Sanders is launching a second run for president. He's joining a crowded Democratic field. Moments ago, he spoke with CBS about it.
The time to replace it.
And also launched what I think is unprecedented in modern American
history, I'm going to guess. Now is Stacey Abrams. She's the former Democratic gubernatorial nominee in Georgia and currently the CEO and founder of Fair Fight Action. Senator Sanders endorsed her gubernatorial run. Ms. Abrams, it's great to see you.
Good to see you as well. Thank you.
What do you think of Bernie Sanders getting in the race? Is 2020 the right time for Bernie Sanders?
I appreciate the fact that Senator Sanders is joining a very diverse field of candidates. I appreciated his endorsement, as I did the endorsements from the other candidates who are running. And so I say the more the merrier. We will have a robust debate about the direction of our party and the future of our country. And so I welcome him aboard.
What it seems as though the Democratic Party is displaying at the moment, if you look at Amy Klobuchar's town hall meeting last night on CNN, you see pragmatism versus progressivism. And I'm wondering where you think the voters are on that spectrum.
I don't think it's a contrast. I think it is pragmatism and progressivism. Americans want progress. We want to see our children taken care of. We want to make certain that if you work a full day's job, you get a full day's pay that can actually help you achieve economic security. And I think the debates that we're going to have during this primary will illuminate the fact that we have a complicated country where everyone has to work together, but where everyone should have an opportunity to succeed. And what we see in the different positions and policies being proposed is that there are different ideas for how we get there. And what we want is a robust debate where every person running for office has to talk about how they will make our country stronger.
I think that sounds like a great academic exercise, of course. But as you know, there are some progressive ideals that seem to be a bridge too far for some voters, such as 4 years of free college or getting rid of private insurers. And I'm just wondering which candidate or which idea can best beat Donald Trump, which, of course, is the Democrats' ultimate goal.
Well, actually, I don't think the goal is to beat Donald Trump. I think the goal is to win the White House. The goal is to put forward policy ideas that resonate for the majority of Americans. I ran a campaign in Georgia that was grounded in progressive values, but used a very pragmatic lens, because I understand that there are different conditions that happen in the state of Georgia than in other parts of the country, but the mission has to be the same. That's why I talk about debt-free college, because for Georgia, that was the issue that made the most sense. It's why I pushed for universal access to child care, but through a very specific proposal that recognized the challenges facing the workers in our state. And so what I would ask every candidate to do is to think about what makes sense for the broadest cross-section of Americans. And then we use the debates and we use our congressional leadership to make sure we mold a policy that actually makes sense for the majority of Americans.
I want to ask you about your gubernatorial race and just where you are now that the smoke has cleared somewhat. Because during the race, as you know, there were lots of accusations that your opponent, who was Secretary of State, had set up what you called an obstacle course for some voters to exercise their right to vote, including primarily African-American voters. And so, at the end of the day, do you think that the race was manipulated to the point of being stolen?
I believe that we did not have a fair fight in Georgia, and I'm excited to welcome congressional leadership to Georgia today to talk about the issues that not only face Georgia, but face our nation. We see what's happening in North Carolina. We know about the accusations across the country. That's why I'm proud to be the founder and chair of Fair Fight Georgia, demanding a fair fight in the end of voter suppression. Voter fraud is largely a myth. It happens occasionally, but not sufficiently to focus as much on it as we do. But voter suppression is real. And we know that it is a wrong decision and a wrong direction for our country for people to doubt that their votes count. And so for me, the mission is to make sure that when those presidential candidates come and ply their trade down here in Georgia, and when the national campaigns come here in the general, that Georgia is a fair place where every election is clear and clean and where every vote counts.
Let's talk a little bit about what's happening in North Carolina today. So this political operative for Mark Harris, the Republican, basically there's a witness that says that she did falsify votes and forge signatures and get paid and all of that stuff. What's going to happen in this race?
My hope is that the state elections board will declare the election null and void and will do a do-over. Unfortunately, we face a situation not exactly similar in Georgia, but where Republican Dan Gasaway is getting a third election because of problems with the election system that was managed by the now governor, then Secretary of State Brian Kemp, where they've had to declare do-over because people were allowed to vote who shouldn't have, and those who should have been allowed to vote were denied the right to vote. The threat to democracy in our country is real. Voter suppression is real, and it's nonpartisan, although it does disproportionately affect African Americans in Georgia and people of color and poor communities across the country. And we have to have national attention on this national emergency, a real national emergency, which is voter suppression in the United States.
Let's talk about your future. You are thinking about running for Senate in 2020 against David Perdue. What is the factor that will decide it for you?
I have to be the right person for the job, and this has to be the right job. I do not believe in running for office simply because the position is open. I spent a lot of time thinking about running for governor because I knew that the work I wanted to do for our state was the right work and I was the right person. I understand the opportunity to run for Senate is a critical one, and I think 2021 is going to be a key pivotal year as Democrats start to take more control in D.C. And my job is to decide that I'm the right person to join the fray because we have some key issues that we need to discuss on a national level, and I want to make sure I'm the right spokesperson and the right advocate to make the change we need.
And how will you decide that?
I'm spending a lot of time really thinking about it. I pride myself on being very intentional about the decisions I make. I do a lot of research. I think I've talked to almost every senator on the Democratic side of the aisle, and I will keep thinking about it. But I will also think about what policies I would propose. How would I leverage that position? And am I the person that would best serve our country in that role? And once I make that decision, I'll tell everybody.
Okay, well, Stacey Abrams, please keep us posted on your political decision making and as well as all of the Voting Rights Act that you're working on. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you.
John.
Right, so the man with oversight over the Russia investigation is leaving the Justice Department, and soon. So what does that tell us about Robert Mueller's plans? We'll discuss next.
The Only Adventure sales event is happening now.